Hi coaches, Kate here. I put together this presentation last summer after taking Michael Duggan's class, Best Practices for Instructing and Supporting Students with Disabilities. When the Infographics mini-module was presented to a class last spring, an optometry student asked about a sample in the presentation and ways they could make infographics more accessible to people with color blindness. Since then, I found a lot of great information that works to make infographics more accessible, but that can also be helpful if you're working in PowerPoint. I'm going to start by talking about color. The next slide is all about contrast, but one of the first things you can think about when it comes to color is high contrast color combinations. Venngage and Canva have libraries of resources, many of which are about color. And Venngage's blog is amazing and has a ton of sample color palettes. One post, which is linked in the reference page for this presentation, has an entire list of sample palettes specifically for viewers with color blindness. You want to try not to use color as the only way to convey content. In this example, I'm trying to tell writers that the top line of the text is the correct way to punctuate a citation, and the bottom line is incorrect. But the only way I've shown this is with color. In many cases, you can use textures and patterns in your text to convey meaning or create interest in addition to color. In other cases, use a symbol or an icon to supplement like I did in this revised example. Contrast is a really important part of accessible design. The accessibility check in PowerPoint does include contrast, but you can also check it yourself by viewing your presentation in grayscale. This is the breadcrumb path for that if you use a PC. Under Accessibility, select Display and then Color Filters. If you use a Mac like me, you can use a web-based contrast checking tool instead. This is the infographic I worked on to highlight changes to the MLA handbook. This is actually page 1 of that infographic. I uploaded the JPEG to the contrast checker, and it gave me a ratio and then a pass-fail score. You can see screenshots of that here, but we will look at it more closely in the actual browser. So this sample, as you can see, has 2 different sizes of text in the foreground color I selected, on the background color I selected, both from the uploaded image. The ratio, in this case 2.02, is what is used to generate your grade, and those grade categories are based on Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0, and W3C recommendations. The recommendations and the ratio you see here consider the size and weight of the text, which is why an image can pass some categories for larger or heavier weight fonts, but fail other categories. If you just want to quickly check contrast, you can use the See Grayscale option at the top of the page. Here on the contrast checking website, you can see that I've uploaded the second page of the MLA infographic handout, and I have the contrast checker or grayscale turned on. And so when I click off of that, I can see what this would look like with my lightest background color, which in this case is sort of reading as gray, but it's actually white. And then my darkest color, which in this case is that kind of royal blue. And so you can see my ratio when I look at that is much higher, 5.88. And if I scroll to the bottom, you can also see that I've passed quite a few more categories using that kind of contrast. And so each of these, when you hover over them, does give a little screen tip that tells you about what that category is capturing and how, or what the sort of criteria for passing is. So I'm doing well with the larger fonts and the heavier weight fonts with the light background and that darker color. When I switch my foregrounds or my backgrounds to be some of the other colors that are on here, it's not as great a score. Some of that is something I'm just going to have to accept, and I'm also going to know that that will probably mean I should have a supporting text to go with this to make sure that it's completely accessible to somebody who would be looking at it. So if I put that into a text version, I'm ensuring that anybody who has access to it, as long as that text version is coming with it, will be able to get all the information that's included here in some way, shape, or form. Again, that grayscale option is up here, and it just changes the sample text up there. It doesn't change anything in your actual image. When we look at the color blindness checker or simulator, there is a grayscale option there that we can take a look at that will actually change your image. To allow for better access for viewers with color blindness, try to avoid shades of gray, yellow, and orange. Use colorblind friendly palettes and run your presentation slides or infographic through a color blindness simulator. Here we are in the color blindness simulator, and here you can see the second page of the MLA 8 to 9 infographic already uploaded here. If you want to turn it grayscale, you're going to choose under monochromatic view, this first option, and that will show you it in grayscale. And that just gives you a sense of contrast. You can see here that I'm already going to have issues because some of my text is not showing up at all when I go to grayscale. So that is something I would have to go back and look into. Those, just for reference, those pieces of text are in red. And so that kind of explains a little bit about why we're sort of losing it there when we go to grayscale. The other options that you see here are different types of color blindness, and so you can select them to see what your image would look like to somebody who has that particular type of color blindness. And so this is red weak, and then you have green weak and blue weak, and then you have red blind, green blind, and blue blind. I unapologetically love using a decorative font, particularly when I'm working in Canva, but many fonts limit access to information in PowerPoint and infographics. For size, stick to 16 point or larger for infographics and never use anything smaller than 10 point. The MLA infographic used 20 point for body text and 40 point for headings. For PowerPoint, you want to use 24 point or larger and never smaller than 18 point. This presentation is using 28 point for body text and 44 point for slide titles. Sans serif fonts and standard system fonts are usually your best choices for font accessibility. Within the Microsoft suite and also in Canva and many other programs, Calibri, Helvetica, and Arial are good sans serif options to use. You want to try to limit your presentations and your infographics to no more than 2 font types. When it comes to content, specifically for PowerPoints, include unique titles for every slide. This helps the screen reader know where it is within the presentation. You also want to be sure to include screen tips and alt text. So this image, circa 1989, should include alternate text if I want a screen reader to pick up on it. I spent a lot of time when I was working on this presentation trying to figure out how to get alt text to display on the image, just like it did when I would be on a website and hover over an image there. But guess what? It's never going to show up when you hover in PowerPoint. It will and should on the web. So even though you can't see it, if it's there in PowerPoint, the screen reader will read it. It's a good idea in PowerPoint to continue to follow the 6x6 rule. Limit yourself to 6 lines of text on a slide with no more than 6 words per line. So this one does not come naturally to me, and I'm still working on it pretty regularly, but you want to try to use descriptive hyperlink text as often as possible. So something like this that reads, "This is the web page for WRSA," which includes a screen tip, which you can see here, should be used instead of this, which reads, "Click here to learn more," and my screen tip is simply the URL. So something like this is going to provide more information and offer more access than something like this will. You also notice here I have periods after each of the letters in WRSA, WRSA, and that's so that the screen reader will read it as WRSA. Sometimes the screen reader doesn't, actually oftentimes the screen reader does not read it as WRSA, even though that's how we say it. Creating PowerPoints and even infographics with consistent layouts is probably the easiest thing you can do to make them more accessible to all students. We all benefit from the reliability of form that consistent layouts offer. And so even though I know we're not supposed to, right, and we don't recommend PowerPoint design templates here in WRSA, I will recommend using layout templates, which can be found in the home ribbon instead of the design ribbon. Those layout templates are great for access, and they allow your slides to read kind of similarly for the screen reader throughout your presentation. And layout templates can be added after the slide is already completed, if that makes any kind of sense. So if you need to add titles to your slide for the screen reader, you can do that without really affecting too much on your actual slide design. For screen readers, it's really important that you set the reading order of the pieces of information included on a slide. And so in order to do that, on the Home tab, you're going to select Arrange and then Selection pane, and you should see all of the items on your slide appear there, and they're called something different, and we're going to take a look at this in a second. And they should be arranged in that selection pane in order from the bottom up. Again, we're going to take a look at this in PowerPoint in just a minute. Screen readers sometimes have trouble with text boxes in word art, so you want to make sure you try to avoid those as well. So here we are in PowerPoint, and when you're ready to check the reading order of your slides, select Arrange and then Selection pane, and there you see it show up on the right. You might find Arrange somewhere else on your computer if you're using a PC. Here in my selection pane, you can see the two items on my slide. I have title, and it's going to highlight it here on the slide, and then I have a content placeholder too. So this is not the same thing as a text box, so keep that in mind. It's a content placeholder because that was what was included in my layout template that I have applied to all the slides in my presentation. And so title with the number 1 after it indicates that it's going to come first, and content placeholder and then the number 2 indicates that that's coming second. And then it's going to read these in order from consistent slide layouts all the way through avoid text boxes if you can, based on the bullet points and then the subpoints that are below it. So that's just an easy check that you can do. It's pretty rare that they're going to be out of order, but it's worth kind of taking a look at just to be sure before you are completely finished with your presentation. Finally, an easy extra step that you can take to make your presentations more accessible is to turn your speaker notes into transcripts or text-only versions of your PowerPoints. You can also create a descriptive transcript or text-only version of your infographic. In either case, you want to choose easily identifiable file names, usually beginning with the words, text alternative or text version. So a few years ago, I worked with a student with low vision who used a screen reader, and the file names took up a lot of time within our sessions. The student knew if the document was the one she was looking for within the first few words, but if the truly identifying words were the last ones in the file name, she had to listen to the entire thing. And so it's just a small item to consider that can really be helpful for students who are using screen readers, that they have access to those text alternatives or text versions, and that they are named so that they can find them quickly. You can check the accuracy of your transcripts using a web-based resource like something like Natural Reader, or you can use something like Read Aloud, which is a Chrome extension. These hyperlinks are available in this presentation transcript and are also included on the reference list. Both documents are in the same OneDrive folder as this presentation is. So thank you for your time today.